Okay, next item.
Number 5, no willingness to be better. What I mean by that, seems to me, most people don't care about Japan. Especially young Japanese are totally indifferent about the society, politics, and own country. Again, Japan is a wonderful country, but we have so many cultural issues. Definitely these problems should be addressed, and we need to start working on them. But we rarely have any meaningful conversation about that. People just look the other way and no willingness to fix it. Now, I'm not saying we have to be too focusing on the politics all the time, but it's quite depressing me honestly. How could we improve the country if the people have no interest about the country? In Japan, public opinion often doesn't reflect the government decision. It's often not what people actually want, but people just don't care and are not serious about choosing the representatives. And these problems are likely to remain in many years. I'm not sure you really want to move to a country like that.
Yeah, I kind of agree with this. It's not really not willingness to be better, but it is their indifference to political issues, indifference to issues that should be heard nowadays. For instance, the issue from the item before this about disrespect to time. I don't see a lot of people like pushing back at the workplace. If, for instance, at the workplace, I'm very vocal. I have a very strong personality. I'm straightforward. One time, one of my employers was requesting me to report before and after work. And I'm like, okay, you want me to report before and after work, but I'm not getting paid for that time. That's one. Second, I don't have the resource to report, like to message you before and after my work time. So you should give me the resources. I mean, if I'm working for your company and you want to use my resources, you have to pay for that. I think that's just fair that you pay me for the resource. But when I implied that to my employer, one of my coworkers just said, Niki, all of us does that. And I'm like, I don't care if you do that. All I'm saying is you want me to use up my personal resource for company use, and I'm not getting paid for that. I want them to understand that I'm not doing charity, and I'm not gonna do charity. But most people here, most Japanese especially, their opinion is that if it's asked by your employer, you just have to say yes all the time because it's what's practiced. And I think that's not being progressive. Japan is famous for having high technology, being the face of the future, and so on. But culturally, it's backwards. It's not progressive at all. They're like, what? I would think 20 years behind the US or any Western country when it comes to being progressive. People are indifferent. They don't voice out. They just keep it to themselves. And that's very sad. I think that's very sad.
Number 4, Japanese are fake nice. Now, it's nothing wrong with just being nice or polite, but when I say fake, they don't mean it. Sometimes completely lying about what they actually think in mind.
You can never trust Japanese people.
I agree.
It doesn't mean Japanese people treat you disrespectfully. A lot of times, it's actually opposite. When you ask them for directions or something, they can be really kind, friendly, and willing to help you a lot, even if they don't speak English well. But for example, what if you need to work with them and really need honest feedback or conversation? So here's what happens quite often. You've done something not right on the job and your coworkers noticed. Rather than telling you that directly, they go to the manager and tell him about your mistake. And the manager sending you an email about your mistake, even though his desk mask is just right there. It sounds
Yeah.
crazy, but this is actually not so uncommon. People are just too afraid of saying something
yeah,
directly
not-
and
not
honestly, and they don't know
confrontational.
how to handle conflict.
It's
And a
not,
lot of
yeah.
times, Japanese people are just being passive aggressive. Especially if you are foreigner, maybe they are more likely to be.
For Japanese people, you can take 5 different
That's
people
true.
and the person is going to be acting differently with all of them. Where is the true person's personality? And you can never know that. And that's why it's very difficult to trust. You can know the person for years and know nothing about. That's the biggest complaint I have.
I totally agree with this. It's not called fake nice. It's called I forgot the term. They're just not open. They're just not honest about themselves. They're pretentious. They're pretentious. They're very pretentious. They're not confrontational. I think it comes from the culture of you have to show your best foot forward all the time. I guess it's where it's coming from. As an Asian, I can relate to this because I also grew up with a very conventional Asian culture and environment. And growing up, I would hear my mom tell me that, it's better, it's nice, like she didn't have complaints with her kids because we were really acting nice at school. She didn't care if we were evil at home. Although as a parent, you would think for that, but I think it's coming from that. And I think it's not just Japanese, it's more of like an Asian culture in general. In Asia, we are not confrontational. We only want to show our good side to people, even though we feel otherwise. But in the West, most Westerners are very straightforward. They tell you your feelings, they show you your emotions so that you would understand what they're feeling. And to be honest, my mom was kind of liberal when she raised me up. So many of my classmates, growing up, many of my teachers would really not get me because I'm very straightforward. People find me to have a strong personality in Asia because they find me more straightforward than others. And it's frowned upon here in Japan too, especially in Japan because it's very traditional here. When I was new here, I met this Filipino and he told me that I have to be careful with the Japanese because they had a term, I forgot the Japanese word for that, but they had a term that translates to the Japanese having 4 faces or something like that. They have a different face at home, a different face for friends, for family, or whatever. I forgot. But I'm like, that's serious problem. That's hard to handle. One example, okay, this is coming from my experience. One example, I was new at work and then I was introduced to some Japanese staff. The Japanese staff were so nice. They were very welcoming and accommodating on my first day. All of them told me, if you need help, you can ask for help. So the following day, I asked for help because, hey, I'm this new dumb foreigner in this company. I don't know anything, so can you help me out? The following day, after I asked help, I was surprised. I got this memo. I got this. It's my manager knew where it was coming from, but my manager gave me a warning that, hey, you've been reported because you asked them for help. You were allegedly forcing them to do work they're not supposed to do. I'm like, what? I just asked help because they told me I can ask help. And now that I did, I'm being reported for asking for help. I mean, Come on, I'm a foreigner here. I don't know what your culture is. Just tell me straight away that, hey, we're being nice, but we don't want you to ask us for help because you're just a dumb Filipino to us. I mean, I wouldn't mind that if they told me that straight away. I wouldn't mind at all. Because as a foreigner, we have different cultures. I don't understand where your context is, where you're coming from. Probably they don't understand my culture as well, and that's fine. And I'm totally okay with that. So just tell me face value. Do you like me or not? Do you want me to do this or not? Finish. End of story. Let's move on to the next day. But in Japan, it's kind of different. I mean, you have to read between the lines, but for a foreigner, it's difficult to read between the lines because I don't know where the lines are in the first place. I'm on my third item. Number 3, Japanese people don't get sarcasm.
Number 3, Japanese don't get sarcasm. Now, it doesn't mean they have a low IQ and don't understand any jokes. But the Japanese people have a unique and different sense of humor, just like British people. And sometimes, you totally don't understand why they are laughing or not laughing. It's quite frustrating me sometimes, because when I was in Canada, we just make fun of each other and joke about it. And that's totally okay. That's what friends do each other, right? But in Japan, people take it too seriously or even get offended by that. To be fair, I used to be like that because I didn't have this kind of concept at that time. Anyway, you might be quite frustrated because your humor doesn't work in Japan.
Alright, so before we begin with number 2, I totally agree with this that Japanese don't get sarcasm. They don't know any of the jokes. I think one that I find funny is that if you watch TV shows in Japan, you will see a lot of like wordings on TV, a lot of emojis on TV. I've never experienced that when I stayed in the Philippines, of course, and in Singapore. None of the TV shows are like that in Japan. And then one time on Facebook, I saw a meme. Like there are 2 screens. One is Japanese TV show, and then the screen is like filled with a lot of birds, emojis, all the emotions, whatever. It's like reactionary. It's like it's preempting the viewer how they would respond to the TV show. And then it's funny because the meme says normal TV show everywhere in the world with nothing in it, just the TV show. And then TV show in Japan with all the wordings, everything on screen. And I'm like, oh yeah, I totally understand that. And I don't know. So when I saw that meme and then I shared that on Facebook, one of my friends from the Philippines who is like an otaku, so he's a nerd with Japanese culture, he told me, yeah, you'd expect that because they don't understand, they don't know how to react. And I think that's kind of related with how Japanese don't get sarcasm. It's because their reaction should be conventionally valid. It should be accepted by the society. Like, if you make a joke and they don't get it, they would get offended. So, as an Asian foreigner here, it's kind of challenging to make jokes. I don't know if they'd understand the context, so I'd rather not to. Especially they don't really, I don't really feel respected here in a sense compared to my white counterparts. The white people here are seen like they're on top of the hierarchy, but someone like me, Asian, woman, colored, from Southeast Asia, I'm like at the bottom of the hierarchy, at the bottom of the pyramid. Okay, so now I'm moving on to number 2. It's hard to make friends.
Number 2, it's hard to make friends. Like I said, you can't really trust what the Japanese people say, so you may be having really hard time of telling who are your real friends? Everyone seems superficial. And the thing is, most Japanese people in Japan grew up in Japan, surrounded by Japanese people and familiar with Japanese people only. It can be really hard to integrate in that kind of society and make real friends. So the truth is, most foreigners, as far as I know, they just hang out with other foreigners. In most cases, they don't have any native Japanese friends, not just because of language barrier, but it's more like because of cultural difference. I actually often hear that Japanese people are too used to their own culture and not willing to understand any other culture. So let me ask you, do you really want to move to a country you can't be friends with any of the native people? Maybe it's not a big deal for you, but I would be quite sad about that. It all comes down to this.
Alright, so number 2 mentions it's hard to make friends in Japan. I kind of can relate with this. I don't have a lot of Japanese friends. I met some Japanese at first, but we never had any other interaction after the first meeting. I noticed that most of the relationships here are very transactional when it comes to Japanese. So I opted to maintain friends with foreigners here. Before I went here, I didn't know or I haven't heard any commentary about the Japanese being xenophobic. But when I started living here, some of my friends from the university, from the uni where I graduated, they told me that, hey, you have to be careful. In the Philippines, you have a lot of friends. It's easy to make friends, but the Japanese are xenophobic. They told me that, and I kind of understood after that. They have negative tendencies towards foreigners. Although, of course, I can see that if you're white, you're respected here. People just look up to you because you're white. But for someone like me who's colored and Asian and a woman, no, I don't get respected here. I don't, even for instance, in the workplace, I asked help from someone when I was new. I think I was able to mention this earlier. I only ask help to photocopy. It's very simple. It's just that for me it was difficult because I cannot read Japanese and I don't want to mess up with the machine. I don't want to break anything. So I asked for help. And I got reported for that, for asking them to do work that is supposedly not within their work duties. I'm like, whatever. Okay, so now let's go to number 1. Separation between Japanese and non-Japanese. I have a feeling this is about xenophobia.
Number 1, separation between Japanese and non-Japanese. It's not just like white people or black people, but even many Asians, like Koreans or Chinese, who have been living in Japan for more than 10 years, complain like this. Now, needless to say, not all Japanese treat you like that. Some people like me don't even care you are Japanese or not. But compared to the US or Canada, where I used to live, I can say this for sure. Many Japanese don't treat non-Japanese in the same way, and they make a clear distinction. So people are overly nice or polite and treat you like a 5-year-old child, or they can be really rude or offensive, like staring at you all the time, judging you like that just based on your looks or nationality. Even if you speak fluent Japanese and know about Japanese culture a lot, some people still treat you like that, and you might feel excluded a lot. Again, do you really want to move to a country like that? Like I said, Japan has so many great things as a country, but you shouldn't focus on them only. If you move to Japan, you need to acknowledge the negative aspect as well, and really think about your happiness.
So the last part, I can totally relate with this. I think I was able to mention earlier that, yeah, it is true that the Japanese have a clear distinction of who the white people are, who the non-white people are, who the Asians are, and they don't treat Asians, especially Southeast Asians, Filipinos, really well. For instance, there was a time that I had this company party, and one of the people who hired me, half drunk, told me that, if not for your bachelor's and master's degree, I wouldn't hire you because you're a Filipino. I'm like, why? What's wrong with Filipinos? And he's like, yeah, because Filipinos are not English speakers. And I'm like, so what about English speakers? We've been using English as a national language ever since. My birth certificate is in English. All my documents in the Philippines are in English. So what do you call me? But to the Japanese, if you're not white, no matter what your credentials are, no matter especially if your nationality isn't from those European or American or Australian countries, they wouldn't treat you well. If you're colored, if your nationality shows that, oh, you come from an Asian country, you will not be treated here well. And I think most Filipinos I know here can relate to that. I think most colored people can relate to that. So yeah, it is frustrating, but the only reason I'm staying here is the convenience and the comfort that I can experience here that I will never experience in my country. But that doesn't mean that I should not be respected as a human being. I guess it's lucky. I guess it's very lucky for the Japanese to be born with privilege. If I had that privilege too, maybe, but having privilege doesn't give you a right to be mean to other people. I think that's my message here.
Japan is a bad country or you are a bad person either. It just means Japan is not the right country for you. And that's okay. Japan is not for everyone. And I don't think Japan should be. But at the end of the day, you don't really know that until you actually move here. So if you still really want to move to Japan, why not? It's your choice in the end.
Well, okay, now I'm at the end of the video. I'm just kind of sad with how he ended his video. He mentioned that if this is don't move here because this country might not be for you. But the thing is, it's 2021 now. It's the 21st century now. We've been talking about globalization ever since the 2000s. It's been 20 years ever since I heard the word globalization. And where does that bring us? Why are we still in this backward thinking that, in this boomer way of thinking that do as the Romans do? Hell, there's globalization now. Why are we still being xenophobic? Why are we still discriminating and judgmental? I know it's cultural, but as human beings, I think it's important for us to actively or proactively work our culture such as there's more inclusivity and diversity. That's just my take. Why not be proactive human beings so that we could live together in harmony? But yeah, I do agree with most of the reasons he mentioned here. I'm just sad with how he ended his video. I think there's more proactive way for anyone to live in any country as long as it's legal and as long as people are following the rules. So that's all for me. So what do you think, guys? What do you think about moving to Japan? Let me know in the comment section below.